right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at, I think, a really fascinating case surrounding Guantanamo Bay.
Okay.
And obviously this is a topic that's been
Well,
in the news for
yeah,
many years.
right.
And we're going to kind of use this one particular case as a jumping off point
Yeah,
to kind of explore some of the issues and the history
yeah,
surrounding Guantanamo Bay.
yeah.
So just to kind of set the stage here, the news event that we're looking at is the release of a man named Ridah bin Saleh al-Yazidi from Guantanamo Bay. And he was held there for over 2 decades.
Wow.
And again, we're going to use his story to kind of jump into all kinds of things. Guantanamo. And our source material today is a recent article about his release. So, hey, I guess maybe just to start off, what are some of the things that immediately jump out at you about this story?
Well, I mean, the fact that he was held for over 20 years is pretty striking, especially when you consider that he was never actually charged with a crime. He was just held there based on suspicion.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think is so fascinating about this story. It really kind of brings to light some of the complexities and controversies surrounding Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
And I mean, like you said, he was there for over 20 years since the day it opened, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
And you can't talk about Guantanamo without mentioning that iconic photo of the prisoners kneeling in the orange jumpsuits.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's important to note that al-Yazidi was one of the men in that photo.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So, this isn't just some abstract case. This is a real person.
Yes.
Who was held at Guantanamo. And that image really sort of cemented Guantanamo in the public consciousness.
It did.
I'm curious what you think about that photo and the impact it had.
Well, I mean, it's certainly become an iconic representation of Guantanamo for some people. It symbolized the measures that were taken after 9/11 to capture dangerous individuals and fight terrorism. But for others, it became a symbol of human rights concerns, highlighting the fact that people could be held indefinitely without trial.
Right, and it really kind of captured this debate about security versus civil liberties.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that's going to come up again and again.
Yeah.
As we delve deeper into this story.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about al-Yazidi's journey. We know that his transfer was actually approved over a decade ago.
Wow.
So why the long delay? Why did it take until now for him to be released?
Well, there are a lot of reasons for these kinds of delays. One of the biggest factors is diplomatic hurdles. It's really difficult to find countries that are willing to accept former Guantanamo detainees. Wow. They have to navigate political sensitivities, security assurances, and often a lot of public scrutiny.
I can imagine there's probably a lot of fear and mistrust surrounding anyone who's been held at Guantanamo.
Definitely.
And I'm assuming there are also some legal complexities involved?
Absolutely.
Can you talk a bit about the legal framework surrounding Guantanamo?
Yeah, so you have to remember that this was a time when the world was still figuring out how to respond to the threat of terrorism.
Right.
The legal systems in place were often ill-equipped to handle these new challenges, and that led to situations where people could be held for a really long time without being formally charged.
Okay. So in al-Yazidi's case, we know that he was apprehended back in 2001 by Pakistani forces near the Afghan border. And the initial suspicion was that he was a bodyguard for Osama bin Laden.
Wow.
So it seems like his story really takes us back to the very beginning of Guantanamo.
It does.
Can you paint a picture for us what the atmosphere was like in those early days?
Well, in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, there was immense pressure to capture and detain anyone who was suspected of having connections to al-Qaeda. So intelligence agencies were working around the clock to identify and apprehend potential threats. And early intelligence labeled al-Yazidi as dangerous. But it seems like that assessment was never strong enough to support actual charges.
So what kind of information would have led to that initial assessment of him as dangerous?
Well, without access to the classified intelligence reports, it's hard to say for sure. But in those early days, they were focused on people who were part of known terrorist networks. So things like proximity to key figures like bin Laden, involvement in training camps, or communication intercepts could have all contributed to that assessment.
Makes sense. And it seems like over time, as intelligence gathering and analysis improved, maybe it became clear that al-Yazidi wasn't the threat that they initially thought he was.
Possibly.
And one thing I found interesting in the article was that a significant number of Tunisian nationals were detained at Guantanamo.
Oh, really?
Do you have any insights into why that might be?
Well, the reasons are probably pretty complex, but there are a few theories. Some people think it might have been because of Tunisia's proximity to Libya, which at the time was considered a hub for terrorist activity.
I see.
It's also possible that intelligence sharing between the U.S. and North African countries led to a focus on Tunisian nationals.
Right.
And of course, we can't rule out the possibility that some people were just caught up in dragnet operations based on faulty intelligence or mistaken identities.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reminder that this wasn't just an American story. Guantanamo had global implications.
Definitely.
And speaking of global implications,
yeah,
we have to address the issue of torture.
Right.
The article doesn't mention whether al-Yazidi was subjected to any form of torture, but we know that it was a dark reality for many detainees. Can you talk a little bit about the methods that were used and the ongoing controversy surrounding them?
Sure. The methods used at Guantanamo were highly controversial and included things like waterboarding, sleep deprivation, prolonged solitary confinement, and exposure to extreme temperatures. These techniques were widely condemned by human rights organizations and considered illegal by many legal experts. So the ethical and legal debates about these practices are still ongoing.
I mean, it's hard to even imagine
the
kind of impact that kind of treatment would have on someone.
Yeah, the psychological impact of torture is undeniable, and the long-term consequences can be devastating. Detainees who were subjected to these methods often experience PTSD, depression, anxiety, and they have a lot of difficulty reintegrating into society.
Right, and it also really raises questions about the U.S.'s commitment to human rights.
Yeah.
And the rule of law.
Exactly.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the future of Guantanamo. We know that President Obama tried to close it, but ultimately failed. So how has the Biden administration approached this issue?
Well, the Biden administration has continued the policy of transferring detainees out of Guantanamo, but actually closing it remains a huge challenge. There's a lot of political opposition and concerns about the potential security risks of releasing detainees. And then there are also all the legal complexities surrounding the trials of the people who are still there. Plus, they still have to find countries willing to accept these former detainees.
So it sounds like it's a very slow and difficult process.
It is.
So where do things stand right now? How many people are still being held at Guantanamo?
Well, the number has gone down significantly from its peak of almost 700. Currently, there are 26 men left.
Wow. 26 people still caught in this limbo.
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
I mean, al-Yazidi's release really brings it all into sharp focus. This is such a complex issue with so many layers.
Yeah. What stands out to you from all this?
I think for me, it's the human element. You know, we're talking about real people who've been caught in the middle of this geopolitical struggle.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, what happens now to the 26 who are still there? What does the future hold for them?
That's a great question. And as we consider their fate, I think it's also important to think about the broader legacy of Guantanamo. You know, what does it say about our approach to justice and security in the face of terrorism? What lessons can we learn from this chapter in our history? I think these are questions that we'll be grappling with for many years to come.
Yeah, well said. Definitely a lot to ponder there. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating look at the world around us.
Sounds good.